But all right, so without further ado, we are here today in the middle of the public comment period for the Nitrogen Management Project Protocol version 2.0 update to 2, as we'll lay out as I lay out here in the agenda, discuss the background of the update process and to introduce the version 2.0, providing a general overview of the protocol and highlighting the major updates from the current version 1.1. To solicit any feedback from the public, from you folks who are joining today, and to answer any questions you may have, and then to lastly discuss our next steps. And so, as I had previously mentioned, my name, for those who I haven't met before, my name is Trevor Anderson. I'm a policy manager with the reserve, leading this protocol update, and joined by Sammy Osmond, who just introduced himself. We then, to dive into the background, as I was saying earlier, but you couldn't see, the protocol was adopted first back in June 2012, 1.0, and then 1.1 was released shortly thereafter in January 2013. The version 1.1, the current version, uses a modified version of the MSU EPRI empirical emission factor based methodology for N rate reductions. And it's applicable only to nitrogen rate reductions made on cornfields in the Corn Belt, which is 12 states in the U.S. Midwest, and no projects have been registered to date. So currently where we are, well, for the past couple of years, thanks to the generous support of the USDA Conservation Innovation Grant led by the Environmental Defense Fund, we are now finalizing a significant update to version 2.0. Generally, the major highlights bulleted here, you can see, are the expanded applicability to additional regions, crops, and practices, improving protocol elements and overall usability, as well as the development of a new standardized quantification methodology. Okay, so now I believe we're up to date here, on the same page. This here just provides the timeline of all the work that's put into this update to date. We're really drafting got underway at this time last year, and we engaged with a technical contractor of Colorado State University for support with the standardized quantification methodology. We engaged with a work group of select stakeholders who volunteered their time to weigh in on the development process, and yeah, we just released back on August 1st our draft 2.0 for public comment and public review and comment. And so we're in the middle of that, as we can see bolded here in red. We're in the middle of that 30-day public comment period, and we are fielding accepting comments to be submitted to us through the end of the month by COB August 31st. Let's see. We have quickly here tables of the summary of changes, the major updates from 1.1 to 2.0, and there are a lot. I'm going to touch on the majority of these, if not all of them, in the presentation. So I'm not going to run through them currently right now. They are here for your reference, and also the summary of changes PDF can be downloaded from our nitrogen management revision webpage on the Climate Action Reserve's website. So I encourage you all to these slides will be made available as well shortly hereafter. But I encourage you all to look through these when you have the chance, and especially that PDF from our webpage. So we're going to dive into providing an overview of the protocol itself, and so that starts first and foremost with going into the definitions. So generally speaking, so everyone we know are on the same page here. The objective with this protocol is to reduce nitrous oxide emissions by adopting nitrogen management best practices that further improve nitrogen use efficiency. So that is improving, increasing your output and decreasing your inputs. It's increasing your crop yields while hopefully decreasing your fertilizer inputs, and simultaneously enhancing crop nutrient uptake. And specifically, as this is a carbon offset protocol, to do so beyond that, what is projected to happen in the future, absent a carbon market. So the definition, vague definition we use here in our protocol to define a nitrogen management project is the adoption and maintenance of one or more eligible project activities during the cultivation year of an eligible crop on one or more fields in an eligible project area that reduces N2O emissions. And so we get into those italicized components of the definition in the next slides to get into what that all means. So we have here just a list of the eligible project activities approved for 2.0. Synthetic N rate reductions, the same activity that was eligible 1.1 is also the chief practice eligible in 2.0. With this update and with the reserves protocol updates in general, but there's a important criteria we evaluate in selecting what practices or activities would be eligible in the protocol. First and foremost, there needs to be consistent results in the scientific literature indicating that the activities do reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So strong consensus there. Our findings for the nitrogen management practices can be found in the Appendix A and B of the protocol. There also needs to be sufficient data available for us to develop standardized performance tests to assess the additionality of the emission reductions resulting from the implementation of activities. Generally speaking, their data, we were constricted by data availability in this update, but the development of our performance standard tests for additionality can be found in Appendix C. And then also there needs to be an applicable quantification approach to quantify the emission reductions from the said activities. And so as I mentioned, we had hired a technical contractor, Colorado State University, to develop the new quantification approach, and the details of that are also contained in the appendix, starting with Appendix E. But so, with that background knowledge, these are our final results of the eligible project activities. We have synthetic N rate reduction. So again, that is the reducing the amount of synthetic nitrogen that growers apply on their field compared to baseline levels. And so they also importantly cannot be reduced to below crop demand. We have some measures in place that we'll get onto in short of that. And then new for version 2.0, projects can also use these enhanced efficiency fertilizer products here, either nitrification inhibitors or slow release fertilizers. Importantly, these practices need to be these activities need to be implemented in addition to the reduction in synthetic nitrogen rate. That is I guess that is based on the capabilities of the quantification approach. And also the nitrification inhibitors or slow release fertilizers cannot be used together as the benefits are not able to be quantified, and they also are most likely not additive, as both these products serve a similar, not the same function of delaying the amount of nitrogen that becomes available in the soil and susceptible for loss as N2O. They both function to release the nitrogen that is applied via the synthetic fertilizers, delay or slow its release so the nitrogen is available for the crop when the crop needs it and can take up the nitrogen. So then we also get into the other part of that definition, the eligible crops. For 1.1, we had only had corn was the only eligible crop as grain and silage, and now for 2.0, we've expanded to 7 additional crops. So we have barley, cotton, oats, sorghum, grain, spring wheat, whether it's with or without durum, processing tomatoes, and winter wheat. We also have a default baseline yield option in there if a project is growing one of these crops and has not previously grown the crop historically. But most importantly, while rotations are allowed, the protocol, and especially now that we have all these different crops that are eligible, the protocol, the quantification methodology doesn't quantify for interannual impacts. So what that means is that a baseline crop is compared to the same crop in the project on an annual basis. So corn will always be compared to a corn year will always be compared to a corn year. And if there is a corn wheat rotation, we are not able to, the quantification approach does not calculate emission reductions associated with that rotational impact. And so in that example, a wheat year would need to be compared to a wheat year. Diving into then the eligible regions, where you can see where all these crops are eligible at the state level, at least here. So again, this is a major jump from the 1.1, where only 12 states are eligible. There are now up to 34 states that are eligible. The crops, so this table here highlights where in which states the crops are eligible. However, as we'll get into, the performance standard tests for additionality and thus assessing eligibility are assessed at the county level. So a crop may be eligible in this state, but possibly not in the particular county. And again, that had to do with data availability, but we'll get to that momentarily. Moving along, the other important aspects to note, and so while those were the eligible activities, crops, and regions, there are other activities that are permissible in the protocol and or encouraged. So for example, organic nitrogen amendments are allowed. However, this is in our literature review, or the impacts of organic N on N2O emissions were found to be inconsistent, with studies showing a variety of results, either having no impact or having an increase or decrease on the N2O based on changes in organic N. And we believe that's to do with a lot of the variability that goes into making up, I guess, the N concentrations of different organic N sources. But nevertheless, organic N is allowed. We have provisions though in place where the organic N rate can be increased or decreased from baseline levels. However, the total nitrogen applied, so the total N rate in the project, must still decrease from baseline levels to keep that in check. And as we'll discuss later, any increases in organic N in the project, N2O emissions associated with that will be accounted for. And then nitrogen management best practices, such as the 4 R's, or the other 3 of the R's of the 4 R's, being that right rate is one of them and is included, but the right time, right place, right source. For example, such practices as this are strongly encouraged, especially in the sense of how they may help a grower or project developer to optimize their N rate. New for version 2.0, we are also able to include irrigation and tillage practices. So irrigation will function the same for the baseline and the project. If a field is irrigated in the project, it'll be assumed the quantification methodology will assume it was irrigated in the baseline as well. But so the impacts of irrigation factor into the quantified N2O emission reductions. Tillage practice is a very important one. So there's only 3 general tillage practices that are accounted for. We have it is assumed in the baseline, and so therefore in common practice, really, that tillage, generally speaking, conventional tillage is applied, as opposed to maintaining no tillage, so not tilling. So the 3 general practices that are accounted for here are the maintenance of conventional tillage, or the switch to tillage in the short term, or the switch and then uphold of no-till in the long term. The science is with that while there are N2O emission reduction benefits associated with long-term no-till, which is equal to or more, greater than or equal to more than 10 years of practicing no-till, there are, depending on the scenario, there are instances where a switch to no-till in the short term for any time period less than 10 years results in a positive change in N2O emissions, so an increase in N2O. Those scenarios have been identified, and so those scenarios, that would be any combination of an eligible activity, crop, and region. Those scenarios have been identified by the reserve, and we have a separate table and are working to combine it into one of our Excel tools for project developers or protocol users to look up. Generally speaking, it tends to be where smaller percentage, smaller N rate reductions are made in the project, and when an enhanced efficiency fertilizer is not applied, if in those scenarios where with the small N rate reduction and no enhanced efficiency fertilizer, should the project switch from tilling in the baseline to no-till in the project, so 1 year of no-till, it may be the case that the field would result in positive N2O emissions, and in such case it would be ineligible. So we have that list for everyone to look up as well. But broadly speaking, it should not impact. We do not see it as being a barrier to implementation. Also, with our definitions here, just getting into project structures, we've expanded the project what entails a project definition to be very flexible and broad, where previously it was in 1.1 it was as simple as one field, a project equals one field. Now we have a lot of for flexibility where multiple fields may be managed together under a project and across multiple owners and multiple regions. Then similarly with our framing, the aggregate structure here is following along with those who know with the reserve's grassland project protocol, where we are taking on this cooperative approach and where multiple projects may be managed together under a cooperative. What is important here with both is that whether it's a project or a cooperative, there still would be a single entity managing all aspects of the project development. So it'd either be a project developer or a cooperative developer. Diving into eligibility. Importantly, going over some of the important changes here to our start date, reporting period, and crediting period changes. These are all intertwined, hence why they are bundled together on this slide. So the start date still has the same definition, where this is the first day of the cultivation year, which is day one of harvest through the end of harvest of a crop, of an eligible crop on an eligible field in which the activities are implemented. And so so yes, the next point starts here. So this is really, so the start date is essentially the first day after the field's previous harvest is completed. Generally, all the eligible crops, as you saw previously, are annuals. So typically we're looking at a 12-month cultivation year. For all the crops in the protocol. And so we've therefore in version 2.0 extended our project submittal deadline from 6 months to 12 months to adhere to the length of the cultivation year of the eligible crops. And so the first field in a project would need to be submitted to the reserve within 12 months, so before the end of its cultivation year. All other fields we've added this flexibility in here as well, where all the other fields that might make up a project can be submitted within a 24-month period, and added so long as they are actually added to the existing field, and so as part of this existing project and not creating new projects. The crediting period we've extended from 5 reporting periods to 10 reporting periods, and this can be renewed one time. We also, what a reporting period is, equivalent to a cultivation year of an eligible crop, so essentially 1 year. We've created a lot of flexibility with our reporting period options though, and so how we're looking at this is essentially, while crediting periods and reporting periods are assessed at the project level, we're treating each field within a project though as if they have their own reporting period per se, because as they do each have their own cultivation year. And so we have this 10 reporting maximum limit for a crediting period, but depending on the situation a given field and a project might face, a field may there are options there for a field to forego earning CRTs, earning credits in a given year of the reporting period, but the reporting period overall of the project, assuming there's at least one field in there that is eligible, will continue to march on. So the maximum limit per crediting period is 10 reporting periods. I encourage everybody to look at the relevant sections. This is 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4 in the protocol for more information there. But as I said, just generally speaking, we've revamped these requirements to promote a lot more flexibility. Slides want to cooperate. Okay, so I'm going to, most importantly with eligibility are the additionality requirements. And so I will touch on our performance standard test we have performance standard tests for our eligible activities, and I will, these are tests that a field must perform better than essentially common practice in order to be determined additional. And so I'll touch on the next slide on our N rate reductions, but here provide a quick overview of what the test is for nitrification inhibitors or slow release fertilizers, as they can only be implemented in addition to an N rate reduction. Based on the reserves evaluation, we are of these financial barriers to these practices implementation and an assessment of their common practice, which determined they really are not commonly applied. Then we've determined that the NIs or SRFs are additional, as they are applied in addition to the N rate reduction. However, if a field comes to us that has applied either of these products in the baseline, it will be ineligible in the project as a limitation with the quantification approach and the modeling there. As again, it was really assessed. We believe it'd be an unlikely scenario, but that would be the scenario. That would be the result if such a scenario should present itself. Generally speaking, with the legal requirement test, it's as long as the adoption of the eligible nitrogen management activities, the N rate reductions, or the use of the NIs or switch to SRFs are in excess of legal mandates, then it passes the legal requirement test. From the reserves evaluation, there really aren't any laws or legally binding mandates that require the implementation of our eligible activities. However, a good example to bring up is the California Dairy General Order, which does have a nitrogen limit, application limit when manure is applied as well. And so in this specific case, to use an example that others could potentially face down the road, especially, there isn't the Dairy General Order stipulates that the N rate applied can be no more than 1.4 times that of the crop needs. So in alignment with to pass our legal requirement test, that would mean only nitrogen applied less than that 1.4 times the crop needs amount would be eligible. For credit and payment stacking, the tests are the same as in 1.1, just had just as we have new activities, though. There could be additional credit or payment programs in which those activities are eligible. So specific water quality trading credit programs and NRCS programs are really the ones that the reserve identified. Again, from our assessment, though, adoption or uptake in these programs is substantially low. I believe even less than 1% of all cropland acres in the U.S. And so we don't foresee there being additionality issues in that regard. But nevertheless, the procedures are laid out in section 3.53 of the protocol should those scenarios arise. But most importantly here, I want to discuss on the next slide our revamped performance standard test for nitrogen rate reductions. So it's still based on a nitrogen use efficiency metric, and the reason for that is because nitrogen use efficiency takes into consideration yield as well, and so we don't want nitrogen rates to be declined to a point or reduced to a point that yield is compromised, because we need to encourage crop yield, and also nitrogen use, by having a nitrogen use efficiency metric and not just basing this on improvements or reducing N rate based on historical applications, is a more level, I guess, makes a more level playing ground where there could be early actors who have already started reducing their N rates, and so therefore the comparison, the N rate reduction from their product to the baseline wouldn't be as significant as laggards who have been excessively applying nitrogen and now for the project are going to make a substantial reduction, and it also gets away at that relative reduction where even it's still the N rate, even with those in the example of the laggards, the N rates that could be applied might still be in excess of common practice. So therefore, we've developed a nitrogen use efficiency metric based on the partial factor productivity, or PFP, which is the simplest nitrogen use efficiency metric that we're aware of, and this is simply the annual crop yield divided by the total annual N rate. So this is simply output over input, and is very easy to keep track, and we require growers to keep track of this, as you just need to maintain yield records and fertilizer records. And so again, you have to simply calculate it as your yield divided by your fertilizer input, and that would include your total fertilizer input, the synthetic and organic rate, N rate. To pass the performance standard test, the field's reporting period, such performance partial factor productivity, must be greater than these partial factor productivity benchmarks the reserve developed. The benchmarks are 3-year crop and county specific averages. We leverage data from the USDA, NRCS, and the International Plant Nutrition Institute to develop these county and crop specific averages. We're not going to go into the development of them here, but our approach is laid out in Appendix C of the protocol, and this is a big improvement from improving the temporal and the spatial scale of the benchmarks, where in 1.1 it was annual state averages. So we're hopeful here that these 3-year county and crop specific averages might be in more alignment or better fit to what a grower may realize on their farm. And so in the development of these benchmarks, we also then have we estimated county average N rates, and so the partial factor productivity benchmarks and the county average N rates are all found in our nitrogen management project county benchmark lookup tool, which rolls right off the tip of your tongue, and that is an Excel tool, which we'll go through a demonstration shortly. and can be downloaded from our webpage. And so this is something that projects must pass each year, each reporting period, in order to be eligible for to earn credits with the reserve. They're the partial fact. They're calculated partial factor productivity. So the yield resulting from the project, the field in the project, divided by the amount of fertilizer that was applied to the field, must be greater than these benchmarks. I'm quickly going to dive into the quantification aspects. So we shows here on the side our greenhouse gas assessment boundary. There are 5 different SSRs, sinks, sources, and reservoirs included in version 2.0. The irrigation SSR4 is the only new one added to the mix, and that's because the quantification approach can now incorporate whether the lands were irrigated or not. Previously projects could only be implemented on non-irrigated lands. But so the primary effect ones that we are still looking at are the SSR 1 and 2, which are the direct and indirect N2O emissions associated from fertilizer applications. LVRO here summarizes as leaching, volatilization, and runoff, which gets at the N2O emission reductions that are released down the stream from where the fertilizer is applied, so that quote unquote indirect, whereas the direct ones, SSR1, are released at the emissions emit from the site. We do have approach for, so getting at the SSR3 and SSR4, should it be determined that there was any changes in cultivation equipment or irrigation in the project compared to the baseline, then we have measures in place to account for the perceived increases in carbon dioxide emissions associated from increased fossil fuel use. And then also very importantly here, we do have a measure in place to account for leakage. That is, should it be, there are equations in place to estimate if yields declined significantly, and if so, there's a measure in place to then proportionally increase the project synthetic N rate, which would mean then that reduction in your synthetic N rate would decline. And so you would, so that's how we account for that there. But so that's kind of touched on the next slide here. In quantifying our greenhouse gas emissions, they are the emission reductions. Emission reductions are associated with the change in the N2O emission, direct and indirect N2O emissions, as quantified with our new standardized methodology developed by CSU, the NMQuan Tool. And so those primary effect emission reductions are quantified using the NMQuan Tool and is for the eligible activities, the synthetic N rate reductions, and the use of one of those enhanced efficiency fertilizer products. We also then, as I had mentioned earlier, will deduct for any N2O emissions associated with increases in organic N rate. As I said before, organic N rate may increase from the baseline of the project, but the total overall N rate must still decline from the baseline to the project. So your synthetic plus organic N rate must still be lower than the synthetic and organic in the baseline. And again, the secondary effect emissions, any carbon dioxide emissions from increases in fossil fuel use in the project are deducted from the emission reductions quantified by the Quant Tool. And this, important to note, this can be qualitatively or quantitatively proven to be de minimis, that is materially insignificant. If so, what we're looking at here is that, I guess for a good example, if there's an increase in irrigation frequency, your fields are irrigating a lot more, or there's fields are splitting their nitrogen application, so they're applying. They're no longer doing single application events, but multiple application events across the growing season. Then it's probably likely that they're increasing their cultivation and their irrigation equipment, and there might be an increase in fossil use. So I said this can be assessed qualitatively, and then if it or quantitatively. If it is de minimis, then we do not even need to account for it here, and that would be, getting at that would mean that the carbon dioxide emissions associated with the fossil fuel use would be determined to be the same in the project as in the baseline. So getting at the biggest development here, our nitrogen management quant tool, which is the emission factor based Excel tool developed by Colorado State University. As I mentioned, it's used for calculating the direct and indirect and total emission reductions from the implementation of the eligible activities. So what's important to note here is that project developers will need to calculate their percentage synthetic N-rate reduction before using the tool, so calculating that percentage change from the baseline to the project. And also what's very important to note is the project users must first confirm field eligibility using that lookup tool as a great reference, because the quantification tool, encouragingly, it has greater applicability than our additionality assessment. And so we're hopeful as more data becomes available to create those PFP benchmarks or similar metrics in the future to assess additionality. As more data becomes available to develop more benchmarks there, then the tool we have could be used. And so jumping ahead, what's important to know here with calculating the change in the baseline, the percentage reduction from the baseline N rate. So the baseline N rate, it's the average from the previous N rate applications during the field's baseline look back period. So the baseline look back period is the period of at least 3 years immediately prior to the field's start date, and that consists of at least 3 eligible crop years. So for example, if you're growing a monoculture, then that would be the 3 most recent crop years. If it's a 2 crop rotation, you might need to go back 6 years, and so on. But so it would be calculating your average N rate over the baseline look back period would be your baseline N rate from which N rate reductions would need to be made in the project. We, for 2.0, have created hierarchy approaches here, as we found that several growers either have insufficient or no records of their fertilizer applications. That will still be first and foremost the preference, though, as this is the most specific to the most likely indicator of the baseline situation, the historical situation, that is providing historical fertilizer management records. But again, but we have these options in place for now. If those don't exist, if a grower does not have such records, then they have the options of either providing perhaps historical records of N rate recommendations they received from agronomic experts, if that was something they had done in the past, or the option of hiring or engaging with an agronomic expert currently, and then locking those N rate recommendations from the expert for the given year as the baseline N rate from which reductions must be made in the project. The other option here, the third choice down the line, would be to use the historical county averages that we developed as part of the additionality assessment, and can be found in our nitrogen management project county benchmark lookup tool. And these are the 3-year county and crop specific fertilizer averages from 2010 through 2012 is why they are the third option, as they are a bit dated, but that is the most recently available data we had to develop such measures, or such N rates. I'm realizing want to crunch this through the monitoring, reporting, verification sections, because a monitoring plan, is still required, as would be the case, and there just are some updates to that to be aware of based on all the changes to the other sections, and so you can see here, get a quick gist of the data that is included in the tables in the protocol for which we need to be included in monitoring reports and or monitoring plans, and those monitoring plans, as with our other protocols, would be needed to be presented to a verifier. But I won't dive too much here on the monitoring. But then, other than getting that, we'll need growers to provide records of practice or activity implementation. So slides are not, looks like it's a bit frozen. Here we go. Reporting. So where a lot of the changes come here is adding flexibility associated with the reporting periods and verification cycles, and that or it made a change that the initial reporting period can be up to 2 cultivation years, and that we have changed our flexibility with our site visits, and that traditionally we had mandated that all projects must require a site visit. That's no longer the case. We have there is a desktop important review component to it all, and then based on, as we get into on the next slide, as this ties into the verification, the verifiers will conduct a risk-based and random sampling approach to determine which fields might need to be visited for a site visit. In the interest of time, I'm going to move ahead because I want to show the Excel tools to everybody. But I encourage everyone to look at the MRV procedures added in the protocol. One important thing I will note is that we did get rid of the corn stalk nitrate test requirement that informed verification in 1.1. We had found that this was a costly request require growers to implement corn stalk nitrate tests, and so that has simply been removed and is no longer required. We have new measurements in place for what evidence we do require, such as fertilizer application records and receipts and whatnot that are detailed in the sections 6 through 8. So, all right, everybody, bear with me as I pull up Excel. I'm excited to show everybody how these tools will function. So everybody can still should see my screen now looking in Excel. I've already populated, for example, one state here, one combination here with there's California and Shasta County with barley, and the average yield, N rate, and the PFP populate. And this is again a project would have to demonstrate a PFP greater than this value here in order to be determined eligible. The PFP is unitless, as it's the pounds of the crop yield divided by the pounds of nitrogen applied per acre. And so how this tool works, well, so you already got Indiana selected here, but so for example, you select your state, and then after selecting, I guess I'll show the whole list though, so you can see only those 34 possible states where we have data for are here. If you select Indiana, for example, then only the counties within Indiana for which we have data available populate, which is a lot in Indiana. So let's just click one of them. Then you will select your crop, and as you can see, even though 9 crops are eligible in the protocol, only corn is eligible in Washington County in Indiana. So we select corn, and after you do so, the average yield, N rate, and PFP populate. So again, how we develop the average N rates is detailed in Appendix C of the protocol. We encourage you to look there for review to see how to see all the work that went into the back end of this. But I will note too that this is a beta version, so the reserve is making some usability improvements on the functionality. However, unless barring public comments, the values are most likely are not anticipated to change. So you can still get an assess. You can still assess, what the N rates and the PFPs are with your state, county, and crop combination. The yields are here as well, for which were all retrieved from the USDA National Agricultural Statistical Service to just so you can see how then the PFP was calculated, as it's the yield divided by the N rate. I will now up. So we have a question. Yep, so we have a great comment here of selecting, of suggesting to put all 50 states into the lookup tool. And if the user selects one that is not eligible, we can have ineligible populate. This is actually a great point and is one of the usability improvements we are looking to make. What actually the reserve is, what we're planning to do is to, because we said, is incorporate to have this really function as an eligibility tool, where those short-term no-till scenarios we could also incorporate them into such a lookup tool. So we do plan to, that is one of the improvements we plan to make, is to really just revamp this where the same values, the same columns will still be here, but to add additional columns to assess eligibility or not. So thank you. That's a great comment. And on that same note, then what will be helpful is if I show everybody now what the quantification tool looks like, so you can see some of the other columns that will mostly be included into an eligibility screening tool. But so here's how this will function. Is similarly, it's very user-friendly with the selecting your selections from the drop-down menus. So let's even just use that example, right, of Indiana, and now we will select the county, which was Washington. The SEEP region populates, which is what this was based on, and now we can select the crop, which is corn. Let's just say we have a 100-acre field, and we will now select our. For now, it's currently to reductions in increments of 10%. This is being currently improved to have 5% increments. But so let's say we have a 20% reduction. Was it irrigated? Yes or no? Say yes. An enhanced efficiency fertilizer. Let's say a nitrification inhibitor was applied. Great. And then we'll say, for simplicity here, to say, was there a conversion to no-till? Will function as a yes or no question, and we'll say no, so that means they are still implementing till. And we can see then at the bottom the results that this resulted in, and so this already, importantly to note too, this already takes into consideration the direct, indirect, and emission reductions and the uncertainty factors as well. So you get your final answer here for that field, for that 100-acre cornfield with a 20% reduction that's irrigated and applied a nitrification inhibitor. We have 11.69 tons of CO2 equivalent reduced for that field. When if we have, if you add additional, the total gets added. But I know we're running out of time. So in the interest of time, I will get back to the presentation. Both those tools are, the NMQuan tool is available per request, as it just is such a large file. So please, if you'd be interested in more, we are happy to share with anybody who is interested in looking it over. And again, it is also in beta version and is undergoing some further updates to improve usability. So we're at limited time, but if anybody, so I'll just, since we are running out of time, I will just note this is definitely not the end. Please submit any questions or comments you have to us via email. I will get that So let me just quickly touch on our next steps here. We are formally accepting public comments through COB Friday, August 31st. We will then be consolidating any feedback where possible into our final, to compose a final board ready draft in September. Our next board meeting is in the middle of October, at which point we will be sharing our final protocol with our board for approval. So again, I'll leave it with the contact information here. I apologize for running out of time and for the technical difficulty in the beginning, but please feel free to reach out should you have any questions, and please, we look forward to receiving and reviewing your comments.
Thanks, Trevor. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for joining today. And I will note too that a copy of this presentation, a recording, and the slides themselves will be available on the website as well. So again, thank you again for attending, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays.